So I've been listening a lot to two really interesting video makers on YouTube. One is Ty Lopez, and the other is Owen from RSD. Both have a lot of great content. I noticed both of them actually talk about death somewhat, and it's not in a morbid way at all. But that's what I wanted to talk about because it's a very thought-provoking subject, and what they're basically saying is, and this is what people have said for thousands of years. It's not just them, but they're bringing it up, and it makes me think about it. Basically, life is limited, and the fact that it's limited, that becomes your motivation to get stuff done rapidly before you run out of life. And I can say that the day that I realized religion is made up stuff and there really is no life after death, so to speak, it definitely creates some pressure in my mind to get stuff done. Now, to me, one of the most interesting things that could be done about this would be actually to figure out some way to not have to die, right? That's really hard to do. There's no physical law or anything like that against it. In theory, we are machines and we could last until we ran out of energy, right? So, in theory, if we were a machine that was built better, or built in such, not necessarily better, but just in such a way that we did not die, then we could at least last until we ran out of energy, the heat death of the universe. And the reason I say that's not necessarily better is because actually death is just part of the way that life works, right? It kind of cleans out the individuals that exist and replaces them with a new, more advanced, more evolved population. If you didn't do that, you'd end up just being stuck with one population or way overpopulated, Now, my feeling is, regardless of the way the nature works in terms of cleaning out populations and replacing them, it would still be cool to be able to not die if you could figure out the technology to do it. Now, I don't think that, at least, I mean, it would be really great, but I just don't think it's very highly probable, and it's possible, but I don't think it's very highly probable that within our lifetime, right? If I'm 35 now and I'm saying average age is maybe 75 for death, so within 40 years, are we going to figure out a way to actually make people live indefinitely? I think that'd be extremely optimistic to think that science can actually pull that off, even though there are people working on it, and I'm actually working at a company called Human Longevity that's working on using DNA, basically sequencing DNA of individuals to try to figure out ways to make them live longer. So they're working on it, but I mean, it's a very young kind of science, and it'd have to be combined with other things, and it would very likely take a very long time to actually figure out how to not die, basically. But there is another approach, which is what I was into probably like 10 years ago, and it's the reason I ended up coming out to San Diego, incidentally. And it turns out that San Diego is not the best place. I mean, things change, and actually probably New York or that area, Boston, is probably a better place to be if you're working on this now. But the idea was, can you scan a brain and get all of the information so that you could actually preserve the full computational function of a human brain? And in that way, whether they live or die, whether that human lives or dies, you basically got a backup of their whole personality and their brain structure, right? So Kenneth Hayworth is a scientist working on this, and it kind of falls under the category of connectomics. It's related to that, and that has Sebastian Sung and some other scientists working on it, Winfried Denk. So there's a whole group of people kind of working in the area of scanning brain structure at a very fine detailed level using electron microscopes. I came out to San Diego because I knew they had a lab with some really advanced electron microscopy that theoretically could be used to do this stuff. It turned out the PI who I was working for over at UCSD decided he didn't want to necessarily go the route of looking into connectomics so much because he had like other things to do. But I mean, after investing a lot of time into that, because I mean, there was a time when it really was my passion. I mean, I've changed around, and years have gone by, and what I've decided now is that even though I am interested in that stuff, I don't know if I want to approach it from an academic standpoint. And the reason is that it's kind of hard. I find that it's kind of hard to get things done in academia. I don't really appreciate the way that academia is set up and the way that they put so many barriers in front of people that don't really need to be there. I mean, just going through the whole process of the education, it slows people down so much, when I really think that younger people could get involved and just do stuff more rapidly. And the other reason that I feel like changing around on the goals is because I believe that these people can actually accomplish it whether I'm working on it or not, right? It's really, when you work on something, it's really more a question of you're kind of choosing, are you going to be the one that does it, or is somebody else going to be the one that does it? Unless, maybe they don't have enough funding or they don't have enough manpower, and maybe you can help them out some. But I feel like if they don't have enough money, the only way you can help is with donations, right? And you'd have to be pretty wealthy to do that. And they actually are often looking for money to do these sort of the more outlandish projects, right? If you're doing a project where you're trying to figure out how to not die, I mean, for the most part, that's a lot of people consider that an outlandish project. It almost needs something more like a private funder who's willing to just invest in crazy stuff, or crazy stuff that could be really useful. And that combined with a lot of other factors, like I think it's important to be able to enjoy life. I mean, makes me think that you're better off, at least I'm better off, focusing on using my skills to make money. I think the best way to do that, since I am naturally a guy who likes to write code and stuff like that, is to go to Silicon Valley, join a startup that I feel like has a really great future and is doing something interesting. Now, that company probably won't be trying to make people immortal right now, because it's very difficult to make a business out of that. To really make a business out of that particular technique where you're actually scanning their brain at an extremely detailed level. Often that would have to happen after death, so that's a complication. I mean, if you catch them fast enough, their brain doesn't. So that's a detail I should probably mention. I mean, in order to do this scan with an electron microscope, you have to be dead, and the only way you could get it in time before the synapses, the connections change and stuff, is to do it immediately after death. So you'd have to have somebody waiting there the moment you died of natural causes to basically grab your brain and scan the whole thing and get a copy of it. And from that, then in theory, and you could, once you've got well, for one thing, you can just preserve it and scan it later. But if you just have the technology to scan it, then even if it took like thousands or millions of years to figure out how to interpret the scan and how to restore the actual function in a computer based on modeling, that'd be okay. Even if it took a really long time, eventually if somebody could figure out, then you could basically restore your consciousness, which would be super cool, I think. Could lead to some really bad things too. I mean, I wouldn't want to be like some kind of consciousness just trapped in a box, not exposed to the outside for some infinite amount of time or something. There's some really bad things that could come out of that, and that's another reason I hesitate to even work on this stuff, because it's kind of a confusing subject. And if you think about it too long, you start to think about how life itself and the continuity of life is such an illusion. But anyway, I'm going way off topic. I'm going to keep this limited to 10 minutes, so that's all I wanted to say about that. Just thinking about, death and how it motivates our life. that kind of thing.